Welcome everybody to Martinis with Scott. I'm here with my good friend and colleague today, Jay Richardson. Jay, welcome.
Good to be back at 20 Bay Street.
Good to
Scott.
see you.
Good to see you.
We're coming to you, as Jay said, from 20 Bay at the Sinclair Range offices in Toronto. You made the commute.
I had to break all of my normal rules today in view of the fresh snow in Toronto of allegedly 11.4, a spuriously precise number, but 11.4 centimeters of new snow overnight, as a result of which I did not bicycle down today. I regret. It's completely out of character and I may be grumpy as a result.
For those of you that know Jay, know his bicycling habits, but if you don't, he's the last remaining person on the face of the earth that bicycles right down University, would be, say, Broadway in New York.
Including in the middle of winter.
In the middle of winter, snow everywhere, but not today. And I flew in barely from New York this morning. It's been quite a windy and snowy day. You gonna shake that, Ashlyn?
There's the martini shake.
There we go. So we're just gonna have a broad conversation today, see how
Very
long
good.
it goes, where we get to. I'm just happy to see you in 2020.
It's good to be in 2020. Each year you get older,
Yeah.
you treasure each new year that much more.
All right, have you ever looked at your profile on Capital IQ? You know what Capital IQ is?
I know what Capital IQ is. It's a resource that we have available to us that I use far too little, but I recognize that it is there. I probably have not seen my profile on Capital IQ.
I like it.
Well,
Thank you, actually.
I may take it and use
Well,
it
you're gonna hear it.
elsewhere
You're
in
gonna
that
hear it
case.
right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you. Cheers. Good to see you.
Cheers.
Don't eat the olives. That's my advice to you. Ashley slips in jalapeno olives just to throw you off. So, Mr. James Jay Richardson, CEO, CFO of Great Lakes Graphite. I want to come back to that, which is doing business as Nova Carbon Corporation. And how am I on screen? Am I good, Ashley? Centered? I'm okay? Good. Enspire Corporation, used to be Walmer, Roxmark Mines, Chief Financial Officer and Secretary and Treasurer.
That one is retired long since.
Right, so some
the
of
first
these
two were both active.
Right, but some of these are going to be gone.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the volume. At the end of this, I'm going to ask you why you can't keep a job.
Exactly.
That's what I want to know. Managing partner of James Richardson and Partners. Well, that's obviously you. Merchant Capital, Bach-Tech Environmental Corporation as a director. Secretary Treasurer Waseco. I think you resigned from that
Yes, I
recently,
have.
right?
Yes.
But that was Waseco Resources, and Chief Financial Officer. Walmart Capital we talked about. Darnley Bay Resources CEO and President at one point. Chief Executive Officer of Datalex Systems. Chief Financial Officer of Cadman Resources. First Metal Inc. was Treasurer. Pure Nickel Inc. What was Pure Nickel?
That was Jay Jaski's firm.
Oh,
Remember
yeah?
Jay?
What was
rest
the
his
nickel
soul.
firm that we did?
That was Liberty Mines.
Liberty Mines,
Yeah.
that's right. Which is not on here, by the way.
No, but it should be. That was one of the better ones.
Exactly. Chief Financial Officer, Nevada Star Resources. Interim Chief Executive Officer of Planetree Systems, where I met you. They threw Blue Heron in here for some reason.
Well, I was CEO of Blue Heron and it
Were
was
you?
listed.
Okay.
Yeah.
First Metals Inc. Partner, Clarkson Gordon in Toronto, which is now Ernst & Young.
If you've ceased with the corporate ones, they've missed the one that I am most proud of, which is Chairman of the Argus Corporation.
I have that from your LinkedIn. I want to talk about that
Okay.
as well. Clarkson Gordon in Toronto and Vancouver. That's Ernst & Young from 74 to 89. It says 89 to 94. Partner at KPMG in London. That's not London, Ontario. That's London, UK. And responsible for establishing their corporate recovery practice in Europe. Consultant to Hollinger. Did you not have a title there?
I was effectively
CFO
CFO,
of
but
Hollinger.
because they had an interim CFO for a very interim period of about 3 or 4 weeks, because they could never come to terms with him on the indemnity, so he quit in a huff they decided that they would desist from giving me the title and just have me as a consultant. It was
Okay.
effective. Yeah, it was
Okay.
an effective way to do it.
And that was during the
Problems.
what do we call it?
We'll
Yeah,
call
problems?
it the problems, like Northern Ireland, the
Yeah,
problems.
Okay. Enerspire, we talked about. Manaka, that's your own company in corporate doctoring, and I'm the only person outside of the Richardson family that knows that's management and capital.
There you go.
So there you go. Datalex Corp, I don't know if we talked about that. Director of Datalex. First Metals, we talked about this. This goes on and on. Here we go. Director of the Ontario Association of Art Galleries. Director of Darnley Bay Resources. Independent Director of Rocksmark Mines. Interim Chairman of Argus Corporation.
Yeah.
Interim for a decade or so? Or?
About 6 or 7 years, yeah.
And you're going to remind me in a minute what Argus is because I forget.
The holding company of Hollinger.
That's right.
And so it was the public vehicle through which Conrad and his gang exercised control over Hollinger and all of the others.
Is that its only asset?
Yes, Argus did have minor additional assets, but Hollinger was overwhelmingly the majority of it.
Okay. Knights Cove Media.
You introduced me to that one, Scott.
Queen Street. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Knights Cove by change of name only.
And did you stick around with them?
Not long.
Yeah.
Got out before it got suspended, halted, delisted.
I was going to ask you why you can't keep a job, but I see that a lot of this is my fault.
Well, I look on it as just going with the turf of being a company doctor. It's like asking a doctor why he has 1,000 patients on his list. And you do multiple things at the same time, and you may have major involvements and minor involvements, as you know, but you have to keep expanding the portfolio of company names, and at some point you start forgetting them all.
Yeah, that's right. Do you have any idea how many?
15 or 18.
Oh, it's way more than that. Come on, there's 20 on here.
Well, I was thinking of just the public companies that I've been on the board of.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. What else we have here? Canadian Chartered Accountant since 1970. Practiced internationally, a partner of Arthur Young, Vancouver and Singapore, KPMG, UK. We talked about chairman of the Royal Canadian Academy Foundation. Advisory board of Manganese X Energy Corporation. Fellow of the Insolvency Practitioners Association UK.
That's a rare one in North America.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Graduated from UT in 1967. That's just from Capital IQ.
That's pretty good. I'm
Right?
impressed, yeah.
On your LinkedIn, we have, in addition, SKS Business Services. Those are those guys that are doing international outsourced bookkeeping
From England and Gujarat in India.
in India,
Yeah.
right? Treasurer of GEC Earth, Green Education Council.
That was a charitable activity on behalf of a sadly now deceased very good friend of mine, Peter Middleton, who was one of the founders of Pollution Probe, which is the oldest, very significant green, environmentally oriented organization founded in U of T, 1970, and he just passed away in the last 12 months, but I helped him with the vehicles that he was using to promote environmental activities that he was involved in.
And missing on all of this is your more recent cannabis
Because
related
those
positions.
both private co's.
True.
But I can certainly mention them. Natura Naturals, I was member of the board and chaired the audit committee. Natura in February of 2018 sold out to Tilray. Soon after, Tilray had a one-day spike, a short covering spike to $300 per share. Yesterday, Tilray was less than 5% of that. It's under $15
Wow.
now. And when we did the deal in February of 2019, pardon me. I'm losing track.
Yeah,
2019
yeah.
was the sale to Tilray. At that point, Tilray's shares were $79.56 or some such price. and they have just gone steadily down to under $15 in the meantime. So the paper that I still sit with, being such a believer in the industry, to my detriment.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, now
because that would have been a decent score.
It would have been. It would have been.
Yeah.
And the successor to that then was the Stanley Brothers USA Holdings Inc. The Stanley Brothers being the family of 7 brothers who were the founders of Charlotte's Web, which has been one of the more successful, one of the few already profitable cannabis-oriented firms, being a specialist in CBD, and the ones who were able to effectively save the life of a delightful young lady by the name of Charlotte Fig something or other. Forgive me, I'm bad with names, but that's where it gets the name Charlotte's Web. Charlotte, having up to the point of meeting the Stanley Brothers, suffered something over 300 on average per week grand mal seizures, and with the judicious application of the particular strain of CBD that they were able to discover was effective in her case, got it down to on average 1 per week.
Yeah.
Apparently there had been already a do not resuscitate order signed with respect to her life, very sadly, but now quite happily she's alive and well, and Charlotte's Web has been a great success. And so the Stanley Brothers USA Holdings Inc. was their intention to do with THC what they had previously done with CBD and Charlotte's Web. But they then had some change in plans along the way, as a result of which I was bounced from their board in September of 2019.
And your colleague as well?
Yes.
Okay. They're not doing well in the market.
Well, Stanley Brothers is still private, and so you can't tell.
But you can follow Charlotte's Holding.
Sorry?
Charlotte Web Holding, or whatever their name is.
Charlotte's Web is not doing well, had previously been one that was defying gravity. It had held in the high 20s after a high of $35 for the longest time, but now is back to about 6 and a fraction, if I'm not mistaken.
By the way, CanTrust found mid-80s today.
And those are cents, ladies and gentlemen, not dollars.
All right. So,
it's a brutal world out there, Scott, and it's not getting any easier.
It is. Unless you're shorting it. And that place is pretty good. By the way, I'm out of touch with the world. I just got back from New York, and so I've been refusing to listen to the news for 3 days because I can't
I
can't deal with the fear selling on the coronavirus. It's really mentally impacting.
Yeah.
Even if you think it's bullshit, it's still mentally impacting.
You know, I tend to be not easily gotten emotional or stampeded, but I am starting to get more concerned that it does seem to be slowly spreading around the world, with Italy, surprisingly, being one of the major points of concern. And you would have thought that they were so advanced medicinally and medically and culturally, socially, in every other way, that would never happen to Italy. But Italy is right up there with Greece and Iran. That's quite a triumvirate to be the 3 major areas of concern these days.
Yeah, and California. Throw that in as well.
Is California of concern these days?
Yes. I think there's
one death there. I think
there's one death, and there's they don't know where it came from. Some guy just got it, and they're not. There's a word for this, but I haven't been listening to the news, so I forget the word is. But they can't identify where it came from. Communal, that's the word, or community, one or something along those lines. And I think there's 80 people that they're on watch or sort of home quarantined or what have you. Don't hold me to the stats, but.
Well, if you want to be worried these days, there's certainly lots to be worried about. And the riots in India, in Delhi, which took place on Sunday and Monday and only got reported in the Globe and Mail this morning on Thursday, there's already 34 people have been killed in that rioting. This is sectarian violence between the Hindu and Muslim communities, and it's just terribly disappointing that Mr. Modi is running a Hindu nationalist government that allows these things to happen.
It's a mess. I'm not listening.
Well,
Head down.
my wife is currently in India.
Yeah,
as you
that's
may or
right,
may
that's
not
right.
know.
That's right. Here's a reference from a Mr. Don Vale on your LinkedIn.
Oh my goodness.
Jay Richardson's professionalism, his breadth and depth of business experience / know-how shines through the darkest clouds of the more difficult business challenges. I've worked with Jay also as a director of the Argus board, of which he is chairman. Don Vale, president, United Global Partners, executive in residence, Ivy Business School, Western University.
Thank you, Don. And he was one of the independent directors of Hollinger who happily fired me from my position of being effectively interim CFO.
I was trying to tell someone the other day how much the directors and professionals were sucking out of Hollinger every month.
Oh, I've forgotten the number, Scott, because I would find it so revolting if I had.
But there was at
remembered it.
least $1 million a month in professionals.
Oh, way over.
Right.
You know, when my former partners from Ernst & Young came in as inspectors under Section 254, their billing rates ranged up to $1,450 per hour. This is not per day.
And what
or
year
per
was
week.
this? Was a long time ago.
This is 2004.
Right. Things were much different for billing hours.
Indeed.
In 2004.
Yeah, even in the professional world, it was
Yeah.
not as obscene as it is today.
Yeah. Crazy. Somebody else I don't see where it's not in my notes, but Jay is a sharp guy who has been fun to spar with. Oh, there you go. Always good to provide a difference of opinion and depth of knowledge on random topics. This raises me to a point. I can find out who that is, by the way. It's on your LinkedIn profile. It just didn't, the name did not make
Fair
it
enough.
to my notes.
Fair enough.
You are, in my career, I'm a relatively creative person. I
Yes.
like to think on financial instruments,
Absolutely.
structures, right? I create things.
One of the
I
things
manufacture-
that makes it fun to work with you.
Right. You are the only guy I know, I've told you this before, where I can whiteboard out the craziest thing involving 18 jurisdictions and 48 different little boxes of corporations. And I could say, here's what I'm thinking, to buy this thing, to finance it, to do whatever, restructure it. And you're the only person I've ever met who can look at that and think about it for a minute and say, yes, and here's a way to improve it.
You're flattering me, Scott, but
But it's
I'll
true.
accept the praise. Thank you very much. This
And
is
so-
high praise, and I am flattered. Thank you.
Well, so I like asking you questions for two reasons. That's one of them, and the other one is professionalism. And we'll talk about both today.
Yeah, and that's undoubtedly the more important one, but we'll get to
Well,
that.
I don't. Yeah, probably. The fact that I was just about to debate that means that I lack. I still need to ask you.
Well, I'll give you a pause if you want to catch your breath, because I was going to go back on the subject of professional fees.
Yes.
The one that I do recall that is clearly one of the most obscene that I have ever encountered was the total professional fees that were sucked out of Confederation Life. Now, Confederation Life was a major financial institution failure. It was $30 billion in assets. It was a major mutual life insurance company that we were in the process of demutualizing when the government and the bureaucracy lost their courage and issued a winding up order against it. But notwithstanding the fact that the realizations on its assets were in liquidation rather than real proper going concerns, it paid 100 cents on the dollar on all of its insurance liability. It paid 100 cents on the dollar to all of its non-insurance creditors.
Wow.
And that was after $975 million had been taken out in professional fees. $975 million.
And again, we're not talking about yesterday.
No,
This was
that
a
was
long time.
1994, 95, 96 was the dynamic couple of year period that was
Wow.
sucked out. Now, it was complex. It was multi-jurisdiction. It was based in Canada, but had a big operation in the US and a big operation in the UK. And one of my positions was as the major liaison with OSFI, the Superintendent of Financial Institutions in Canada, in Ontario, and the Michigan commissioner of insurance because Michigan was its state of entry into the U.S. market, and the chairman of the board of trade in the UK, which was the regulator for insurance in the UK.
Right. Obscene.
Obscene, truly.
On this structuring creativity, a theme that I've been on, not on the Martinis with Scott yet, but I'll get there on Martinis with Scott, but in my professional career, if you were to read a Scott Adams book or listen to his content, he would talk about a talent stack. But for me, it occurred to me in my 30s that I might not be the world's best professional at any one thing, but I can damn well know 90% of almost everything.
And be light on your feet.
Right.
Which is a very important part of it.
Right. And that has served me so well in my career. And to this age, I remain curious. I'm learning. 2020 for me, I'm becoming a digital marketing expert. I'm no longer hiring agencies. I've been diving into the stats on everything. I've been starting campaigns. I'm launching a bunch of more campaigns because I just want to keep learning different disciplines that I don't really know anything about. And in my career, the reason I can do those creative transactions, apart from maybe having a creative mindset, but I know a lot about a bunch of different things. And when I read your recommendation here from Don Vale about breadth and depth of business experience and knowledge, and the reason I think you can understand me is you're the same.
Yeah.
Right. And do you think about that consciously, or did it just work out that way?
Well, we come from the same mindset that we would rather be involved in multiple things, and we by nature are rather sponge-like, and so we like sucking up whatever we can.
Curious.
And we take that then into every future endeavor, and the more time goes on, the better you are at what you do, quite frankly. And it sounds arrogant to say that, and I hate arrogance, but it does seem to be the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you just trip over that, or do you think it's just personality driven? I think curiosity is personality driven, but I think coming from an old school audit background where you're in a different company every day.
Well, that's the background that starts it off.
Yeah.
But I reached out to touch you gently because I wanted to give thanks for the fact that I'm ADD.
Yeah.
I can't concentrate on any one thing for too long. But as long as you come back to things when you need to, you're constantly balancing an enormous tickler file in your brain of what you need to be doing by some particular deadline point, and you do it and you have more fun doing it than concentrating on one thing, exclusion of others.
So I think building a career, if we were to talk to somebody listening to this, building a small business, curiosity, don't be afraid to learn, don't be afraid to try new things. It really adds up.
And you're right, Scott, that the CA student training was terrific in giving us exposure to dozens and dozens of different businesses at an early stage in our careers, and meeting lots of different people. And I think that the first and most important thing that we always did when we went into a new situation without even thinking about it was we immediately started assessing who knew how to do their job and who didn't.
Yes.
That was the most important part of it.
If anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about professionalism. So I had a talk with the Sinclair Range staff about this. When was that, Ashley? A month ago?
Yeah,
about a month ago. And everybody at Sinclair Range is awesome.
Right.
But everybody needs to sit down and have a talking every now and then.
Yeah.
And I asked everybody in the firm what professionalism means to them.
Okay. Good question.
Because we are not truthfully a professional firm in the sense that we're not offering opinions or writing that sort of
definition.
thing. It's a narrow definition.
I think you're a very professional firm.
Right.
I think you acquit yourself very professionally. That's the
100%. Because what I said is, you may not think of us as an accounting firm or a law firm, but I'm telling you, when we're talking to bankers up this street or in New York, we don't have competitors, but we're compared to Ernst & Young.
Yeah.
right? Even though we don't do the same work.
Yeah, and people know that you come out of a KPMG heritage,
Right.
and that's the way you were trained, and that's the
right.
standards that you expect to work to.
and it's the standards that the street expects us to work to, right?
Yeah.
Whether we're doing that or not, that's the expectation. And so if we don't meet that that expectation, it looks bad on us.
Yeah.
And what I find is, not at Sinclair Range necessarily, but just culturally in general, certainly in North America, there's a sense of entitlement, get rich quick,
Yeah.
right? Instant gratification, speed.
Yeah.
So sloppiness,
Quick and
errors,
dirty.
typos, things
Yeah.
don't add, headings are wrong, email subjects are wrong.
The edit quality on any written report is diabolical.
Right, right. And it drives me nuts.
Yeah.
So I blame mark-to-market accounting for all of that, but beyond that issue.
Okay.
Yeah, so is it...
Just a little professional in joke there,
That's
folks.
right. Is it our age? Am I wrong about this?
It's the way we
think-
were brought up,
I think
Scott.
it's really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, if you were to ask me wherein lies professionalism, I would think that the first word that would come to my mind would be integrity. That
Yeah.
you tell it like it is, that you have the highest of personal standards, and that you stick to them. And, you know, as soon as you start talking about professionalism, you take me back to my father, who was a professional chartered accountant, and he was a partner of Clarkson Gordon in the good old days when the four executive partners were Walter Gordon, Duncan Gordon, Jeff Clarkson, and George Richardson. And at his funeral in 1974, he was described as having been the conscience of the firm. And
Yeah.
that made a tremendous impression
And it
on
meant
me.
a lot.
It
to
meant a
him.
tremendous
Yeah.
amount. It was the way he lived, and there was no way that he was going to budge from what his standards were.
Right. So we do this show. I do this show, and we spent, this is year 2. The first year we spent with different production techniques. We've got a couple of different producers. Ashley helps all the time. It's been a great team, but what I've learned is, and it's not just me, but I listen to other people that do shows, they get the same feedback. We're shooting this on an iPad.
Yeah.
Because it's the easiest and best quality after how much will we spend? $10,000, $15,000 in production equipment. This iPad on this stupid little tripod
And
is
it's
the best way to
amazing how
go.
it comes through. It's
Right.
astounding.
We've stopped editing. We started live, but then we got into overproducing. At one point, we had big lights in here, and then it gets sent off to Fawad, and he does some editing and puts on these animated thumbnails at the front of it. The more you produce, the worse it gets, right? It's better with the errors and the rawness and the genuine nature.
Natural and genuine.
Yeah. Maybe a blog post written with some errors in grammar or a typo, you know, there's studies that say that's way more persuasive. Right.
Interesting thought.
But it drives me insane with a perfectionist attitude that we were brought up with. So we define professionalism as right and timely.
Yeah.
Those two things.
Well, that's a pretty good, quick descriptor.
Right. So we can't put out spreadsheets that are wrong, that are incomplete, that don't have proper headers on them. It has to be right, and it has to be on time.
And
Whatever
then-
those expectations are.
And as a result, you will stand behind it. And
Yes.
that's the other big element of professionalism, is the preparedness to stand behind it.
Yeah. So I think, what do you tell your kids about professionalism?
Well, I guess, again, thinking back to the dinner table around which I was brought up, it was not a question of being told anything. It was a question of the atmosphere, the conversation,
Right.
the ambiance, the life that was lived. And I think with my kids, that I have never sat down and said, now this is the way you've got to think about life or professionalism or your career or anything else. It has been by example. And thank God I've had a wonderful wife who has been absolutely fabulous in the child rearing process. And together, I think we provided paths that were examples that were not identical, but when put together gave them a good comprehensive view of life and what it was all about.
Yeah. Okay. Here's another, along the professionalism, another thing that I've learned from you is when you work at the big firm, so they look at files that may not be all above board, have some air on them, got some management with
we've seen more of that in the last 20 years than we wanted to, haven't we?
And the big firms, they spend a lot of time wondering where they want to be involved and associated with that file or not.
And sometimes not enough time deciding.
Right. And you said to me long ago, you said, Scott, every company deserves help. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's like the criminal lawyer who knows that he is defending all kinds of people who were guilty of their crimes, but they are all entitled to the best defense that can be presented. That's what Goodman and Robinette and all of the great litigators have made their careers out of, and the ones who do it well are brilliant examples, and Maria Knighton is now a good example of the next generation and doing a great job of it.
Do you know her?
I don't know her.
Okay. She's
trained with Eddie though.
Right. She's on for against Cantrust. She's leading a class action on that.
And I didn't even know that she got involved in class action litigation, so that's very interesting.
It is very interesting.
Yeah.
And so I watched her on, I don't know her, I know her name, but I watched her on TV on an interview, and I just thought to myself, uh-oh.
Here comes the judge.
Yeah. That doesn't sound good at all.
I'll have to tell JP that. I'm not sure if he's aware.
You should watch Martinis with Scotty. Would have known 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, there you go. He to his regret, was a big shareholder in Cantrust, and has watched it just go down the tubes, unfortunately.
Yeah. All too predictable, I fear.
Well, there
goes back to Manaka. Management first.
There you go.
Capital after.
That was what Warren Watson always stressed, was, and it's the management first and then capital.
Yeah.
That was a good name, and it was Warren Watson's name prior to it being mine. Yes, he was the one who developed it.
Let's talk about international business. I know we're jumping around here, but
that's okay.
That's you've lived in.
Well, let me give you a quick resume. Yeah. From 1979 to 1993, I dragged my career and my family from Toronto to London, England, back to Toronto, to Vancouver, to Singapore, to Italy, back to London, England, and finally back to Toronto.
Right.
And sometimes people hearing that without knowing who I am say, "Oh, you must be one of those glamorous international bankers."
Right.
And I say, no,
like
no. I'm just one of those very unglamorous international bean counters.
Yeah.
But it was a wonderful opportunity to learn how things are done differently in different parts of the world. It completely corrupted my family. My son is now practicing as a doctor in England. My daughter now owns and runs a sports bar in Calpe in the Costa Blanca in Spain. My wife, as I mentioned earlier to Scott, is now working as a teacher in India, having in the last 14 years worked as a teacher and an administrator in the educational system and an international baccalaureate specialist for a year in Kuala Lumpur, a half a year in Oman, 2.5 years in Morocco, a year in Nanjing, 2 years in Turkey, a year in Kazakhstan, 4 years in Cairo, 3 years in Malaysia, and now she is out of the workforce. She is volunteering in a wonderful school in Bangalore in India. And this is a school that is unique in having been founded by an Indian chap whose family moved to the U.S. at an early enough stage that he completed his education in the U.S., was successful in business, made enough money that he went back to India, founded this school, which is founded on the principle of taking annually 12 4-year-old boys, 12 4-year-old girls, all Dalits, all the lowest of the low untouchables who otherwise have absolutely zero educational opportunity, and giving them an education not only through the Indian equivalent of A levels, but pays for their university education beyond.
Wow.
Just an astounding commitment. And that's what then has inspired her to be making her commitment to volunteer with them.
Amazing.
It is amazing. And some of the success stories, because he's already had graduating classes. In fact, I was contacted 2 weeks ago by one of his graduates who is completing an MBA at MIT Sloan in Malaysia, because MIT Sloan has a branch in Malaysia, but it is indistinguishable from Boston. And she is now looking for a position because she's about to get her MBA in May of this year.
Amazing.
So if you know of anybody that would be interested in being put in touch with such a bright, incredibly prospective graduate, I would be delighted to make the introduction.
Send your requests in the comments
Please
page.
do. Please do.
In these places that you lived, as opposed to visiting Moreto, so where you lived and did business, you stayed. So I've been in maybe more places, but for really short periods of time. Like 3 months. I define living as 6 months, but you've actually spent quite a bit of time in the UK and Singapore.
Six and a half years in the UK,
Right.
3.5 years in Singapore, yeah.
Right. So, an audience of business owners, entrepreneurs, executives with maybe not as much international business experience. Every day it becomes more of an international world.
Yes.
What have you learned over the years about that?
And every day you have to be more careful about how you try to do business in it, because it gets to be more and more aggressive, more and more ragged as to what the standards are, and just more and more unpredictable. But it is a world of opportunity that we now have the possibility of getting ourselves into, whereas 50 years ago in our parents' time, they wouldn't even have thought about it.
Yeah. So what's the key to success? What have you learned?
Cultural adaptation. You have to live there long enough before doing anything significant by way of investment of capital to understand what it is you're investing into, with whom you are doing it, what the cultural preconditions are, what the standards of integrity are, because around the world they are just completely different.
Completely different.
Now, when I was...
And they're not nearly as open as we are in many instances.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. And
They're way more skeptical of us than we are of them.
that they will circle the muskoxen communally and protect their own to the detriment of the outsider who may try to break in just because he's an outsider. He doesn't deserve the same consideration.
I was having a cigar last night in New York with Mike Frawley,
Yeah.
former vice chairman of Jefferies
Yeah.
Investment Bank, and he was telling me about his experience going to Hong Kong and mainland China for Jeffries because they had offices there. And he walked in, and on the sales desk, there was 50 guys there, and 49 of them were white, and the office was struggling. These were his words, not my words.
Not surprising.
Right. And he didn't understand, and he came back, and then eventually, the powers to be at Jeffries and say, hey, how'd that trip go? What's going on? He says, you guys are just doing everything wrong. Anyway, so they switched that equation around, and he had some crazy style, like business went up tenfold in a year, and basically, the Chinese guy went out to party with his peers, right? Instead of trying to force it. It's very culturally unique everywhere.
And in fact, I was in Singapore in a period of transition from the former to the latter. There had arrived in Singapore as the office managing partner about 9 months before my arrival, and he was the one who prompted my arrival. A really bright, aggressive American, but he was married to an Indonesian wife, and he had lived and worked in Indonesia and knew the region, and he was rapidly indigenizing the firm in Singapore.
Right.
And I was very saddened by the fact that in 1989, with the merger with Ernst & Winnie and Arthur Young, we and Arthur Young effectively got squeezed out because Ernst was 3 times the size in Singapore that we were. And so he departed back to the United States, and I went on to the UK. But we were starting to have a really good time. It was a very interesting period.
So I find in international business, you wander into a country, first of all, be humble.
Yeah.
Like, it's really important because they're
and
looking
that's
at
not
you.
just in another country. You do that here, and
But
it becomes
but
a habit.
Yes, but it's really important there.
Yes.
Because you don't know.
And the ugly American syndrome is the last thing you want to
It
get
just gets their
tagged
back
with.
up. Exactly. Right. So you humble, get the best lawyer immediately, wander Nurse and Young, find yourself a partner.
And
Right.
your
Even
second point
if you don't have a file, just
your-
wander in.
Your second point of getting the best lawyer really resonates with me, because in our offices in Singapore, in the next floor above us was Allen and Gledhill.
Yep.
And a great guy was leading that firm then, informally. He was not the office managing partner, but he was the leader. And he subsequently became, of all things, a member of the board of directors of the Bank of Nova Scotia in
Oh, really?
Toronto, where I bumped into him on the street from time to time. But C.J. Chen was just an incredibly bright, capable lawyer. And as a result of Jeff Jones, my office managing partner, and others of my partners, cultivating the relationship with Allen and Gledhill, which was the floor above us on Robinson Road, we got entrusted with what was one of the most incredible engagements in my life. And I have to say, I've been so lucky, Scott, that I've had 6 or 8 incredible engagements. When I think about how lucky I've been, I just am astounded. But
I want to know what they are.
Well, here's the first one. Not the first. This is one of the last, in fact. Well, no, there have been some last. This is in the middle. We were appointed on October 21st of 1987 to investigate the trading that had taken place on October 20th, 1987, the day following Black Monday on Wall Street, by CIMEX, the Singapore International Monetary Exchange. Because CIMEX was the only forum in the world which traded Nikkei index futures.
Okay.
And, of course, with Wall Street plummeting on October 19th, the Nikkei having closed on the 19th prior to Wall Street opening at, I believe it was 22,000 and somewhat, now coincidentally just about where it is today, now 33 years later. On October 20th, opened at 21,000. This, of course, is many hours before New York is going to open because we're 12 time zones away. In the next 12 minutes, traded down to 9,000 and back up to 18,000 because it opened before the Nikkei opened in Tokyo. And this was all in anticipation of what was going to happen. And because many people made gajillions of dollars out of being on the right side, down and back up, there was suspicion of some manipulation in the market. And so we were appointed to investigate. And it was just a fascinating engagement. It was a lot of fun.
Wow.
You want me to go through my other?
I do.
I can give you.
I do. I just want to know if reporting in 10 days in Mandarin is one of the...
We reported in English, thank you very much. but Scott is alluding there to, in Liberty Mines, we did report in Mandarin, and that was one of our coups.
It was.
That was just...
In 10 days.
That was
We
great.
did a full forensics report, operational review.
I'm going to see if I can remember my fantastic engagements. I think the first great one was International Chemalloy. And this was a Toronto Stock Exchange listed mining firm that was not a junior exploration. This was a producing mine. They owned control of Tanco in Manitoba, which was the tantalum mining company of Canada. And it was owned jointly with Manitoba Development Corporation, a pretty respectable financial institution run by the province. And we were appointed by the Delzato family, the people who are the controlling shareholders of Tridel and one of Toronto's biggest, if not the biggest, residential property developers, because one of the three brothers, it is Tridel because it is Angelo, Elvio, and Leo Delzato, but Angelo had invested a modest, I think it was only high six figures, not into seven figures, but into a convertible debenture of International Chemalloy, run by a guy by the name of David Winchell. And we got appointed by the Delzatos as interim receiver under a bankruptcy petition, a receiver and manager under the debenture, and inspectors under Section 254 of the Business Corporations Act. And my brother and I, in our first report to the court, produced a document that occupied 1 foot of shelf space, detailing what our findings were, because this company had been looted very, very cleverly by David Winchell. And ultimately, Thorn Gunn paid a $1 million settlement in view of audit shortcomings, and Winchell personally paid $1 million fine to stay out of Shadow Crowbar, and we were able to appoint a new independent board of directors, bring the thing back out of receivership, and put it back into the hands of its shareholders.
Great.
That was a pretty good outcome.
That's a great deal.
Yeah, that was good stuff. Now, into the 80s, in England, I had a fabulous client who had been looted. Looting does seem to get into my...
It does.
People think of me as being a guy who spent way too much of his time in his career in insolvency, but the more interesting part has been the amount of time in my career I've spent in forensic accounting and litigation support.
Yeah.
And when I arrived in England in 1989, I was immediately approached by a very senior lawyer of Herbert Smith, who had a client that was a Greek shipping family that had been effectively looted to the tune of $34 million by an Indian chartered accountant who had been put into management by the son of the recently deceased Zion of the family, who in Greek terms had died at the obscenely early age of only 77 years old. His son was only 23 years old and was doing a PhD at Cambridge and got catapulted into the CEO's chair, where he put effectively the entire empire into the hands of this Indian chartered accountant. I don't know what bar he had met him in, but it was obviously a very sketchy introduction. And over the course of the ensuing 12 months, the Indian chartered accountant from time to time would come to him and say, Mr. X, and of course I won't identify the family name, but I've been doing some good work, and we've made all of these cost savings, and so I think it's time that I had another $5 million bonus. And these $5 million bonuses added up to $34 million over the course of a year. I believe also, and I've never had the complete story on this, and I'm never going to, because the Herbert Smith lawyer is now deceased, very sadly, but he one time alluded to the fact that I didn't know the half of it, because beyond the $34 million that came out of the shipping company, there were some funds in some Swiss bank accounts that were even more significant.
Sure, you never know. Let me reword that. You always know there's more.
Yes.
Always, 100% of the time, there's more.
Well, I arrived in the London office of KPMG, number 1 Puddle Dock, my favorite address in the whole world. One Puddle Dock, literally. Blackfriars, London, England. And they sit right beside the Blackfriars Bridge at the
Puddle Dock.
Puddle Dock.
I love it.
And very soon after my arrival, my senior partner introduces me to this lawyer, and he says, Jay, I think you're going to have an interesting conversation with this chap. He's got a most unusual need for someone who has the kind of receivership experience that you have, but is not ordinarily resident in the UK, because the family actually live in London. And if it were to be a UK-based receiver, that would bring the entire empire onshore for tax purposes to their enormous detriment. And so I was resident in England, but not ordinarily resident, because I spent more than 283 days outside the country for very good tax reasons also.
Yes.
We started into a conversation that then took 4 months to develop, and at the end of it, he, by his brilliance, and this guy was absolutely brilliant, but he had persuaded the 23-year-old renegade son, who had repudiated his mother in favor of adopting this Indian chartered accountant, persuaded him that he had made a mistake, repatriated him into the family, got, in effect, a complete confession and okay, it's your ball game. As a result of which he did not need to appoint me as receiver, but he sent me that night to Piraeus to pick up the threads, because with that, the Indian decamped with all of the management staff that were beholden to him. And so the Piraeus management operation just been completely denuded. And I was to go in and pick up the reins of management at the same time as do a forensic report as to where the money went, what happened.
It sounds like in those days, unlike today, in a big professional firm, you were permitted to have a lot more managerial.
It was a very
dual
unusual
role
situation, Scott, partly because I had come from Canada,
Yeah.
where they knew that we oftentimes got more heavily involved in management in
Right.
receivership situations.
But they don't anymore.
To their detriment, to our regret, to our benefit.
Yeah.
Because that's the distinguishing characteristic with us, is that
Yeah.
we do.
That's exactly right. Let's talk about, let's change topics entirely.
Okay. Sorry, I was going through a list.
I loved it.
I haven't gotten to Confederation
Do it.
Life
Do
yet.
Confederate Life.
I'm not going to do it, but it was certainly one of the great engagements. a $30 billion financial institution. And Paul Cantor asks me to come in and be his right hand and his liaison with all the regulatory agencies. Oh, by the way, Jay, incidentally, do the demutualization of the company. And oh, by the way, the previous precedent for doing a demutualization was the Equitable Life in New York, which was about the same size, and to enable an infusion of capital from AXA in the French insurer. In 1981, they demutualized, and they spent $250 million in professional fees to do so, and took 36 months to do it. And Jay, you've got 12 months,
Tuesday.
and don't you dare spend more than $50 million doing it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. God bless him. Paul was just an absolutely fabulous guy to work for. And in fact, when you referred to the fact that I did not know how to hold down a job, that was Paul's way of introducing me. Was he would go through a quick resume of my career and say, which always just is to say that Jay just doesn't know how to hold down a job.
There you go. Right. I made up the joke on my own, just so.
Yeah. No, I give you credit for it.
Thank you. When I met you, you had a wine cellar of, I feel like 6,000.
You're exaggerating.
4,000?
No.
But it was all the
hundreds
same
and
bottle of wine.
thousands. Yes, exactly. Yeah. But it was good.
It was good. How many bottles did you have?
I think I brought 250 cases from Singapore, so what's that, 3,000 bottles?
You owned
Actually closer to what you said than I recall.
I might have been wrong about 6, but it was 4 at least.
Yeah, 3,000 or 4,000 bottles.
And you owned a vineyard in Tuscany.
It was
and
all
operated.
Fattoria di Tregole, which I am fond of saying was located in the heart of the heart of the heart of the heart of the world. Because to me, Italy is in its position on the Mediterranean, essentially the heart of the world. Tuscany is the heart of Italy. Chianti is the heart of Tuscany. Chianti Classico is the heart of Chianti. And we were in the very center of Chianti Classico. We were 15 kilometers north of Siena, 45 kilometers south of Florence. And we had this beautiful, tiny, we produced about 1,000 cases a year, which is totally uneconomic production, but at the right height of a very good DOCG, Chianti Classico, that sold in vintages on a couple of occasions that I was able to arrange. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
How long did you have it?
We owned it for 10 years. And ultimately, we were really obliged to sell it because we had completely exhausted our ability to hire people to run and manage and operate it for us. Because this was Italy at its glorious height in the mid-90s, when no proper Italians wanted to do manual labor in a field. And even though it was small, it really only required one good dedicated person, which we had when we purchased the farm. She came with the farm and was superb, but she then developed a bad back, and after 3 or 4 years she had to retire, and from then on it was downhill. And at the end, our concern was that if we continued to own it but not operate it as a vineyard properly, that we were going to get declassified, and that then would ruin the value of the property. So reluctantly, we sold it because it still had its DOCG classification. It was purchased by a couple. He was an architect in Florence who owned a glass factory in Venice, an interesting combination, and she was an art conservator.
In fairness, I think everybody owns a glass factory.
Thank you, Scott.
Yes.
Oh, that's lovely. Anyway, they operated it for a number of years, but they've now sold it on, so sadly I no longer have the personal connection with it, but it was just in a superb location. We had glorious times. Our kids had wonderful times. And let me tell you a brief little story about my dear son Jacob, who, when he arrived in 1989 to go to the American International School in Florence, And one of his first days at school, somebody came up and said, "Oh, Jacob, where are you from?" And Jacob, at the age of 8 years old, says, "Well, I'm a Lithuanian, Canadian, Singaporean, Italian, but really I'm a citizen of the world." You're my boy.
That's right. There's nothing obnoxious about that at all.
Oh, well, it was just, I thought,
Okay.
a superb recognition of how worldly he had become in a short period of time, how he appreciated it,
Yeah.
and how he has now developed it by developing his career in England.
He's a good kid.
Oh, he's a great
They
guy.
both are.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm so lucky, Scott, in so
Yeah,
many
yeah.
ways. I am so blessed.
I told you we'd run out of things to talk about in 20 minutes, and here we are over an hour.
Well,
Tell me about retirement.
mm,
So,
some people should do it, but not me, and I don't think you either.
no. So my peers, mid-50s, okay? So
Seriously. You've actually got friends like that? I don't have any friends like that because I
I don't-
shunned anybody
I
like
stopped-
that at
well,
an early
this is
stage.
my point. I stopped going to our boys' golf trips. They're just so fucking depressing. Like, I'm talking like from 50 to 50. You know all these guys, Ashley. Like, they're just like, what are you going to do for retirement? Like, I'm thinking about winding up. They're like 52, 53. I was like, I have a 7-year-old. Like,
And thank God that you decided to do the family thing at a late stage in your life because it is now very much to your
it
benefit.
wasn't from lack of effort, believe me.
We won't talk about that.
Yeah.
That would get us into some very dangerous territory
Yes.
that we really don't want to venture into.
Right.
And I was relatively late. I didn't marry until 30, and it was in another 5 years before we had Jacob. But that's got nothing to do with the fact that I just have no intention of letting go of the fun things that I do. And if I
It
were
keeps you sharp, right? Gives you a reason to get up.
to me, the most telling comparison, and it's not a fair comparison because I do believe that there were serious physiological health issues. But if I compare to my father, who was the last partner of the Clarkson-Gordon partnership, who did not have to retire at the age of 65. So that positions us back into
Right.
the early 60s when 65 was the retirement age. I think it's now 57 or 8, having gone through a number of steps down. But he was the last one who did not have to retire because his membership in the partnership predated the introduction of the mandatory retirement age. And so he soldiered on until 67, 68, at which point it was a very sad, rapid deterioration that in retrospect we now identify as his having suffered small strokes that were not diagnosed, that were not
Right.
recognized along the way. But my most vivid recollection is sitting in the library, which was his office in 21 Doncliffe Drive, which was the family home of the time, and his asking me to help him reconcile his checkbook. And this was a guy who used to run his finger down a column of 5-digit numbers to check the heads at the bottom,
Yeah.
about as fast as that.
Yeah.
And he just had an astounding capacity that had been destroyed. He died of a massive stroke at the age of 69 in 1974.
But now 67 in those years would be today 87.
Something like that. I
Right.
think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, in
So these-
terms of
these-
health, nutrition, and a whole bunch of other physiological things, we're different animals
Yeah.
from what we were then. Secondly, we no longer have mandatory retirement ages, thank God.
Yeah.
Third, we have different inclinations and intentions, at least the yous and me's of the world do. There are others, as you have identified, that don't.
A lot.
Yeah.
That's kind of my, so I look at the demographics on this show, and we've got a lot of young some in the middle, but then a pretty strong group in the mid-50s to 60 kind of age group. And I wonder if they're like the people that I know, if they're like my peers, and I don't understand it. It's occurred to me retroactively that maybe they've just been unhappy since they were 30 doing their job, and now they want to be done.
Yeah, sad.
Yeah.
I feel sorry for them. But I also feel sorry not only for the individuals, but also more significantly for the collectivity. When you look, for example, at the teachers of Ontario, for whom I have the greatest of respect because my wife is a teacher, and to me, being a teacher is one of the greatest callings in the world. But they all look forward to retiring at age 55 with some incredible percentage of their leaving salary, something like 80 or 85% of the $100,000 a year that they were making in their last year, as being an annual income for the rest of their life. How is that sustainable?
Well, because they were not paid fairly for their whole career.
That's got a lot to do with it. That does have a lot to do with it.
I mean, they only did the job for the pension. I mean, they did it for their love of teaching and being helpful, but they accepted the pay because of the pension.
But the fact is, they're now going to live to 100 or 110, and the cost of that pension is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know, the great reset that John Malden talks about as looming sometime, not tomorrow, not next year, not the year after, but sometime in the next 5 or 10 years, the great reset of the United States and others having to come to grips with what their total liabilities are as a federal or state or municipal government because of the unfunded pension liabilities, as well as the incredible debt that they have incurred. And I know that you tend to be on the right side of the political spectrum and have a greater sensitivity on these things than I do on the left side of the political spectrum, but I share the concern.
I don't care about the debt. I'm not a very good right winger.
Well,
I'm socially very liberal. I don't care about debt. So I don't.
But at some point,
I'm of the Dennis Miller school. He says, he wanders, the comedian.
No, I don't know.
Well, his joke was that he wanders through cocktail parties and he tries to be concerned. He tries to put on a good face, but he says, do we really owe this money to somebody? He says that if we do, fuck them.
Well, to a great extent, we owe it to ourselves.
That's the real issue.
And so there is a certain amount of fuck you attached to it. But at some point, it is unsustainable, and we are coming to a point of reckoning.
Per capita per GDP is way less than Canada's, for example. Way less.
Depending on how you add it up. You have to add up the federal, provincial, municipal, and a whole bunch of others to be able to make that statement.
You get Bernie's $15 trillion healthcare plan. That's not bad. But
like, I love Bernie to pieces. He's got some good ideas. He's coming from the right side of the spectrum, and but he says this and this and that, and individually, each of them is a great idea. But if you add them up,
he doesn't add very well.
I think that may be
he doesn't add very well.
I think that
I'm obviously against his side of the spectrum to that extreme.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a right winger at all. I'm a pretty middle of the road. On some things, I'm actually pretty liberal.
Who's going to win the Democratic nomination?
I think Bloomer's going to win.
Seriously.
Yeah, I'm not saying that.
He's so bad he shot himself in the foot the first time around.
He spent $500 million already, hasn't he started?
I know.
He's buying up.
Reminds me of Prem Malik. I
Yeah.
close on
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
That's just for starters.
I haven't even started. Oh, he's buying up the debt of candidates, of locals for their support.
Yeah.
He's just gonna. I don't see how anybody competes against that amount of money.
Well, Tuesday of next week is going to be
We're gonna know soon.
Very, very interesting.
We're gonna know soon.
I would love to be watching.
And here's what I think. I think he gets slaughtered by Trump. But if he wins, I don't think it's the end of the world.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. He's done some really dumb things in his career as
100%.
mayor.
Yep.
But I don't think it's the end of the world by any means.
Yeah, and the rest of them, it might be the end of the world. Like, who else do you see on there?
Or is there a good proposition that with Trump it's the end of the world.
No, I don't think so.
Because he's going to get so arrogant, so completely out of control. You know,
I think he's going to
you
get
think he's
more arrogant.
unmanageable now? Oh, just wait.
Just wait until he doesn't need to be reelected.
Exactly.
Well, the thing about him is it's been 4 years and we haven't found the end of the world yet. And things have gone pretty
We're
well.
still looking for it.
Well, yeah, we're still looking, but it hasn't happened. We haven't found it. And on every measurable metric, things are pretty damn good. Right. They're pretty
It's
damn
amazing what negative interest rates will do around the world, isn't it?
good. That has a lot to do with everything.
Doesn't it?
Right?
And can you explain them to me, please?
No.
Why I, as an
Yeah.
individual looking at retirement, wanting
Yeah.
to have an income,
Yeah.
should pay you to take my money from
Yep,
me?
yep, 100%. I'm with you on that. My big concern with American growth that Trump is, and you know I've always been a big fan,
Yeah.
like long before his political career. But my big concern is you can't maintain that level of prosperity and the rest of the world is falling apart.
Exactly. It's the
Right?
divergence.
Which may have nothing to do with you, but the divergence is going to catch up with you at some point.
both nationally and internationally. And he doesn't give a shit.
Well, he's fixing the national to some extent
Tell me how.
by getting people jobs that didn't have jobs. Wages are going up for the first time in 20 years, and they're going up substantially. Now, moving from $15 to $18 to $19, it may not seem substantial.
Oh, that is substantial, Scott.
Okay.
No, I'll agree. That
Okay.
that is significant.
But if you care about, I'm not picking on you, if you care about inner cities, like the urban communities, people having jobs that never had jobs, never had prospects, never had hope, that are addicted to opioids because they're lost in life, it's going to make a change.
And the amazing thing is that most of that is despite his corrupt rhetoric that was just so bizarre and stupid and wrong. Like, we're going to get the coal mines producing more.
But they are producing more. They are. But they're never coming back. I mean, the Democratic argument, it's never going to happen, right? And that's not a wrong argument. It's a dead industry in many respects.
Mhm.
But what he's done is he's letting business and industry kill itself, right? He's giving it a
Yeah.
fair shot. Because, I mean, I don't know if you were involved in these files, but I was involved with one of our peers working on some coal deals during the Obama years in the
No.
U.S.
No,
Well, you know who, and he
Yeah.
was, and the Obama administration was really just purposely circumventing the entire industry, but they didn't have the integrity to stand up and just say, "This is what we're doing. It's over." They
That's
just
a political
regulate.
process, isn't it?
Well, it shouldn't be.
It
I mean,
shouldn't
that
be.
bothers me. See, if you look at the things that bother me most, Trump's rhetoric doesn't bother me nearly as much as that dishonesty and killing of those communities on purpose.
But be fair, Scott. Trump's dishonesty is just so blatant as to be not even worth talking about, and that's why you're not talking about it, because it's so
That's right.
blatant that's not worth talking about.
That's right.
Yeah,
And I don't think it's an evil dishonesty. I think it's a pitch.
just a
dishonesty.
self-aggrandizing,
Yeah.
narcissistic.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. We can agree on that. Listen, we've talked about today professionalism. We talked about what was the other ones that I want?
Family.
No, I'm talking business at this point. So I have a point to this.
Sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted.
Professionalism, international business, and give me 1 second. So professionalism, here we go. Creative structures, talent stacks. That's where I was heading with that.
Talent set,
Professionalism, knowing a bunch of different things, being
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to entrepreneurs, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, business managers, investors?
Oh
What
man,
are-
those,
what are
those
your-
are so different people.
What are your-
Entrepreneurs, business managers.
What are your top 3 just business life lessons? It's a way to wrap this up.
Stay light on your feet. Be prepared to adapt. It is a world, it's trite to say how rapidly it's evolving and changing, but given the fact that I have grown up between 1945 and 2020, what can I say? But the change that I have seen. Okay, the change that I have seen. Let me reach into my pocket, pull out my Samsung 9 Plus Galaxy phone with I don't know how many gigabits of.
Has more processing power than NASA did for the moon
I'm
landing.
going to take you back to a personal experience. Not only was I one of the management committee of Confederation Life at the time of its demise in 1994, I had been a summer staff member of Confederation Life in 1963 because I was a student in maths, physics, and chemistry at the University of Toronto, and those were people they liked to hire because that's where their actuaries came
Right.
from. And so I, in 1964, was lucky enough to be one of only 2 people out of their entire summer staff of some dozens and dozens of people who was entrusted with becoming a computer programmer in 1964.
Really?
When they had,
Was that punch cards?
it was punch cards and paper tape drives and an IBM 705, which was one of the first dozen big mainframe computers in Canada, which was so big that it occupied the entire ground floor of 321 Bloor Street East, the corner of Bloor and Jarvis, now Rogers, but it was Confederation Life's head office. It had its own air conditioning plant in the ground floor because there were so many tubes in it that otherwise it would have fried itself if it didn't have its own air conditioning plant. And it was so big, Scott, you know, it had 40,000 positions of memory. It was a 40K machine.
That's funny.
This now has about a gajillion times
Yep.
the capacity of that, just in terms of computing power, plus all of its connectivity, the internet, and
Yeah.
the phone, and everything else, all in what fits into my pocket.
So
And
stay
that's in
nimble.
my lifetime.
Yeah. So stay nimble.
Be prepared to adapt.
But don't lose sight of this of the
Don't lose sight of your integrity.
and the
Your
golden
first,
rules.
most important.
I did a show the other day that it really comes down to contribution margin
Yeah.
and overheads. And you should just never lose sight of that.
Yeah.
Right? And
What
it
else
should-
is there?
And it should go in that, volume. And I said, so there's 3 things to worry about in business, and it's in this order: your margin, your overhead, and your volume.
Yeah.
You agree?
Yeah. That's a pretty simple formula.
Yeah.
There you go.
And in that order. Don't even change the order. Worry about them. Worry about them in that direction. All right, my friend. Anything else? Whatever.
This has been a great pleasure. Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you
I
so
have
much for
thoroughly
coming.
enjoyed this. I did
Anytime.
not expect this conversation to go on anything like this long, but it has been a thoroughly enjoyable
I
experience.
feel like I'm cutting it off, but thank you so much.
There you go.
We're done, Ash.